If you like using Excel, well then HRIS might be the perfect fit for you. Hey, I'm Graham, and I've been working in HR for the past 10 years, with the last 5 of them being focused on the information systems, or HRIS side of things. And recently, a friend who was considering a career change asked me what it was like working in HRIS, and if I enjoyed it or not. And that got me thinking, do I even like my job? And honestly, yeah, I do really like working in HRIS. There are so many good things about it that you don't really get to see or experience until you're actually in it. And today, I'd like to share a few of those with you. In this video, I'll be talking about what it's like to work in HRIS, the good and the bad, what competencies you should have if you want to work in it, and finally, my recommendations for how to get started in it, plus which system I think is the best. Now, if you're not quite sure what an HRIS even is, and need me to back up a little bit, no problem. An HRIS, or Human Resources Information System, is a software program that an organization uses to store and manage their employee data. There are lots of different HR systems out there, all of which are slightly different from one another, but serve similar purposes, storing and processing employee and HR information. So if you work in HRIS, you're essentially responsible for making sure the system and processes are set up properly for your organization, and that everyone is using them correctly. And since you're the system administrator, you're also likely in charge of things like reporting and security. Working in HRIS is definitely not the same everywhere. The type of HRIS work you do will really depend on the company that you're at, how big they are, and what system they have in place. And in my experience, there's 3 categories of company. Number 1, there's small and relatively young companies. Think less than 100 people. The HR team is probably very small as well. They might have a payroll system, but no real HRIS. So most HR data is stored in files, documents, and spreadsheets. Number 2, there's medium-sized companies who've been around for a while and who have maybe a few hundred people. They probably have a handful of HR team members who cover all sorts of HR things. They may even have a basic HRIS that covers their key HR functions like time tracking and recruiting. And they may be looking to implement a larger, more advanced HRIS as they continue to grow. And number 3, there's larger established companies. Think 1,000 people or more. These companies have already gone through their initial growing pains. They have a larger HR team that's broken out into specialized functions, and they likely already have a fairly advanced HRIS that supports a variety of HR programs like performance management or compensation reviews. Obviously, each company is different, and there's lots of companies that fit in between these categories, but this is just meant to give you a general idea of the different stages from an HRIS perspective. Now, if you work in HRIS, normally you work at a larger company with a larger HR team. Smaller companies, even if they have an HR system, would normally not have someone specifically dedicated to it. System administration would fall on the general HR users to manage. And for less complex systems, that's totally fine. You might be one of the 3 HR people at your medium-sized company that uses Bamboo HR, and you'd probably be responsible for a lot of general HR things, including the HRIS. But when you get to the larger companies that are using the more advanced systems like Workday or SuccessFactors, usually that's when you need a team that's dedicated to configuring the processes and serving as administrators. And this is ideally where you end up if you're looking to get into HRIS. Now, if you're thinking about getting into HRIS, I'm gonna guess that you already work in HR. Almost everyone I know who works in HRIS, myself included, started doing general HR first, and then went into HRIS after that. And I feel like this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. HRIS isn't something that most people think about when they're starting their careers. If you're people-oriented, you might lean towards doing general HR and not HRIS. If you're more technically oriented, you might lean more towards IT, doing software development or engineering. And again, not HRIS. For me, I went into HR because I wanted to build positive culture. I wanted to ensure that issues were dealt with fairly. I wanted to solve people problems. But as my career progressed, I actually found myself enjoying the technical and system side of things more. So I ended up moving over into HRIS. And I know this isn't the case for everyone, but I think my experience is pretty common amongst my HRIS colleagues. In my experience, HRIS is kind of a middle ground between HR and IT. Your focus is on the technology side of things, but you're still in HR, solving HR problems and driving HR initiatives. You're kind of like IT support, but specifically for the HRIS that your company uses. You're looked to as the technical expert. and you're expected to advise on best system practices to ensure data accuracy and integrity. You help ensure that employees, managers, and other HR team members are all using the system properly. And to help with that, many HR systems provide a sandbox environment, which allows you to build and test things out without worrying about breaking anything. Sandbox environments are super important for doing things right. Once you've figured out the right solution and confirmed that it works in Sandbox, then you can go ahead and move those changes over to the live production environment. Apart from that, here are some other duties you might have if you're working in HRIS: generating reports or designing reporting solutions for other users, potentially combining data from multiple sources, investigating different system issues when they come up. Like, if someone is getting an error message whenever they try to submit something in the system, that will likely come to you to troubleshoot and resolve. Configuring, testing, and implementing new system functionality to support different HR programs. For example, maybe your organization wants to run their annual salary increase program, but this year they want to do it through the system, and they've never done it through the system before. As HRIS, you would probably be responsible for figuring out how to set this up and then testing it out, and then advising on how everything should be executed in order for the process to run smoothly. Or uploading mass data changes in the system. Let's say we need to change the job titles of 500 people. Rather than doing these all individually, you can probably do this through a mass upload. However, the system will probably require the data to be formatted in a very specific way, which is on you to coordinate. I'd say overall, if you're analytical and like working with data, like you like building and running reports, analyzing data, or finding discrepancies and figuring out what's causing them, you would really enjoy working in HRIS. And on that note, here are some other core competencies that would be really good to have. Being process-oriented. Systems follow processes, and you're working with the system. You have to know how everything flows in order to fix problems and keep everything running smoothly. Having high attention to detail. The smallest discrepancies can cause huge errors. Sometimes you'll have to dig super deep to figure out why something isn't working. And it may be that one tiny thing wasn't set up properly from the beginning and needs to be adjusted. Approaching things with an HR or people-based mindset. You need to keep the end user experience in mind when you're setting things up. And you'll need to constantly be asking yourself a bunch of HR-related questions. Are we being compliant with local law? Is this information confidential and should it be shared out? What impact will this function have on employees? And what other processes will be affected if we change this? And finally, having a customer service focus. At the end of the day, HRIS is about supporting others to ensure that they know how the system works and that they're using it correctly. Like I said, it's a middle ground between HR and IT. Now, I think a big question that's often associated with HRIS is, do I need to know how to code? In my experience, no, you do not. Some systems use SQL, so it definitely doesn't hurt to have coding experience. But for most systems, you just need to know how things work within that particular application. And that can easily be learned if you have all the competencies that I just mentioned. You don't need to know how to code. You don't even need to be super great at math. I sucked at both of those things in school, but I feel like I've ended up as a pretty decent HRIS person. The way I think about it, if you're good with Excel and like formula logic, then you'd probably be good at HRIS. Although, to clarify, I don't necessarily mean that you need to be good at Excel because you'll be using Excel for everything. I mean, you might be, but the way you work with Excel is similar to the way you'd work with an HR system. You're organizing, formatting, and structuring data, and you're noticing and investigating tiny discrepancies that might result from certain things being out of place or being entered incorrectly. So, I guess a better way to put it would be, if you have a brain that's good with Excel, you have a brain that would also be good with HRIS. Okay, here's what I see as some of the best things about working in HRIS. One, because it's a specialized technical field, the pay can often be a little bit higher than general HR roles. You definitely get paid for your knowledge and technical expertise in HRIS. Two, HRIS skill sets are in pretty high demand, and demand will continue to grow as more companies mature and implement systems for themselves. So in my mind, it's a really well-paying field that has a great outlook for the future. And three, you're still in HR and you still get to solve people problems, but you're also slightly removed from all those less fun HR conversations. Look, it's never fun having performance discussions with someone who's struggling or having to lay people off. And I mean, most of the HRIS people I know are perfectly capable of having those conversations empathetically and firmly. But it's also nice sometimes to not have to be the person who does this. As for some of the bad things about working in HRIS, Well, number one, it's not really a super sexy job. Sometimes I'm a little self-conscious about saying I work in human resources information systems, because I know to some people that probably sounds like combining two of the most boring fields you can probably think of into one. Even within HR, it might not be considered that exciting. A lot of people go into HR to do the people and culture stuff, and that's the fun, extroverted side of HR. HRIS, on the other hand, is kind of like the nerdy, introverted, technology-driven sibling in the family. So even though I find it super interesting, I know it's not necessarily the case for everyone. And two, it's hard to get experience or develop expertise on your own. Almost all HR systems are business to business, so you can't just download it and learn it on your own time. You can only really get experience and training with a system if you work at a place that uses it. And because each system is different, the knowledge and experience you developed with one doesn't always translate to others. So sometimes it isn't always easy to move around into other equivalent or higher level HRIS positions. For example, you might be a specialist with the system at your current job, but maybe you're kind of bored of the system and you want to switch over to using another one because you've noticed a lot of other companies using this new one. You probably won't be able to move into a specialist level role with that system right away. It would almost be like going from PC to Mac when you've used Windows your whole life. Yeah, you know how computers work, so you'd be able to figure things out, but there would definitely be a learning curve. And because of that, if you want to switch systems, you might have to take a pay cut or start in a lower level position to learn how that system works. If you want to work in HRIS, you mainly want to be looking to work at larger companies. The larger companies are the ones that will actually have roles dedicated to HRIS. Smaller companies probably just won't have an HRIS for you to work on. Medium companies may give you experience with the basic HRIS, but you'll probably be doing a lot of general HR stuff as well. Ultimately, if you want to work in HRIS, you should aim to work at a larger organization that already has an HRIS in place, preferably one that you want to get experience with. On that note, many companies do not necessarily have entry-level HRIS positions, so sometimes it can be hard to find your way into it without system experience. But system experience doesn't always have to come from HRIS specific roles. If you're an HR generalist at a large company that uses UKG, you're probably in that system every single day. You're entering employee data, approving transactions, and pulling reports. You're one of the front-end users using the system the way it was designed for your role. And doing all of that is giving you valuable system experience, which, trust me, still counts. So even if there aren't any HRIS roles at the organization you want to work at, you can still get valuable system experience by being in other HR roles. Maybe you take an HR coordinator or generalist job to do what you know, but also develop familiarity with the system and how it works. And if you show interest in working in HRIS, I'm sure the opportunity to join that team will arise at some point, especially if the company's big on internal movement, as most companies are. Another great way to get into HRIS is by going through the implementation route. There are always medium-sized companies in the process of implementing an HR system, which is a huge undertaking. Normally, they need quite a few people on that project team, and most of those people are going to be HR people. And being on an HRIS implementation project team is probably the best way to build your knowledge and experience. You'll literally be building the system from the ground up. So you could aim to join a medium-sized company that's about to start their implementation process. Or you could also come in from the consulting side of things. Either way, the implementation is a key part of every company's HRIS journey. And being part of that process is a fantastic way to get into this field. And finally, you may be wondering which system is the best and which one should I try to get in with. For me, I've been on a SuccessFactors implementation team, and I've worked with Oracle, Banner, and Workday. And I mean, every system has their strengths, and some definitely have their weaknesses. And really, any system would be good to get experience with if you're just starting out. But when it comes to the best, for me, Workday is where it's at, especially with regards to what it can do, how easy it is to use, and how many successful companies are using it. So if you're interested in HRIS and a system opportunity comes your way, I say definitely get in there. And if it's Workday, even better. Anyway, that's it for today. If you found this insightful, your thumbs up is very much appreciated. If you have any questions or thoughts about your own HRIS experience, or any counterpoints to things I've said, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Consider subscribing for more content like this. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.